My fiancé confessed. I don't want kids with you. You're too short. Bad genes. I'd rather use a sperm bank. I said, you're right. Then I canceled the wedding venue, the caterer, and the honeymoon. The next day, she begged me to reconsider from her mother's couch. I used to think the worst pain a person could inflict came with shouting, with slammed doors, or with betrayal in some loud and obvious way. But when it finally happened to me, there wasn't even an argument. No fight. Just one sentence, delivered almost casually, while she scrolled through her phone. Her name was Clara. We had been engaged for 6 months, dating for 3 years. I had believed we were solid, the kind of couple that grew stronger the more pressure life put on us. I was wrong. It happened on a Tuesday evening. We'd both come home tired, her from a day at the office, me from working extra shifts at the plant. I had picked up a second job to help cover the cost of our wedding because Clara's vision was elaborate. She wanted a ballroom reception, a string quartet, imported wines. I had agreed, because she used to look at me in a way that made every sacrifice feel worth it. That night she was curled up on the couch, scrolling, when she asked a question that didn't seem important at first. Do you ever think about kids? I told her the truth. I did. I imagined a family someday. A little girl with her laugh. A boy who inherited her sharp eyes. I thought she'd smile at that. Instead, she set her phone down and sighed. I don't want kids with you, she said. You're too short. Bad genes. If I ever do it, I'd rather just use a sperm bank. Just like that. No hesitation, no attempt to soften it. Like she was commenting on the weather. Something in me stopped. My breath, my thoughts, even the pulse in my neck. For a few seconds, all I could hear was the faint hum of the refrigerator. She didn't even look at me. She had already picked up her phone again, thumbs moving over the screen. I should have exploded. I should have demanded an explanation, shouted, cried, begged her to take it back. That's what she probably expected. But instead, I heard my own voice come out steady, calm, like it belonged to someone else. You're right. Her head snapped up. She blinked, maybe confused by how quiet I was. But I didn't give her time to answer. I stood up, went to the bedroom, and shut the door behind me. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and thought about everything I had given up for this woman. The overtime shifts. The savings I'd drained to put down deposits. The way I'd brushed off friends who said Clara was cold, shallow, self-centered. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I started with the wedding venue. We had booked a sprawling estate just outside town. Non-refundable deposit, they had warned. But after explaining the situation, the manager surprised me. They were willing to release most of the funds if I canceled immediately. I signed the papers before I could second-guess myself. Next came the caterer, then the florist, then the honeymoon package Clara had insisted on in Santorini. Each call was like cutting through another chain around my neck. Every confirmation email felt like a small, clean breath of air. I didn't tell Clara what I was doing. She thought I had left early for work. When I came home that evening, she was lounging in her robe, glass of wine in hand, as if nothing had changed. I sat across from her and watched her scroll through photos of bridesmaid dresses. She didn't notice the exhaustion on my face. She didn't notice that something had snapped in me the night before and would never be repaired. That weekend, we were supposed to do our final cake tasting. I canceled that too. The bakery owner gave me a puzzled look, like he was waiting for me to explain. I didn't. By Saturday evening, the cancellation notices had begun arriving in Clara's inbox. I knew because she stormed into the kitchen holding her phone, eyes wide. What is this? She demanded. Why is the venue saying we forfeited the date? Why is the florist thanking us for letting them go? I kept chopping vegetables for my dinner. I canceled them, I said simply. Her mouth fell open. She sputtered, searching for words, finally landing on. You what? Are you out of your mind? We can't just. You're right, I said again, this time looking her straight in the eyes. We can't. She froze. For a moment, I saw something flicker across her face. Fear, maybe, or the realization that she had underestimated me. Clara had always treated me as if I'd bend no matter what she said. That night, she realized bending wasn't the same as breaking. She didn't say anything else. She grabbed her bag, stormed out, and drove off. I thought she might go to a friend's. Instead, the next morning, I learned from a mutual acquaintance that she was staying at her mother's house. Her mother hated me. She had never bothered to hide it. Too average. She'd once whispered to Clara when she thought I couldn't hear. Not polished enough, not wealthy enough, not tall enough. I didn't care then. But now, I wondered if Clara had simply repeated what she had been hearing all along. Sunday evening, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Clara. I need to talk. Please, can we meet? I didn't answer. Instead, I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and pulled up our joint account. She had contributed almost nothing to it. I had been the one funding everything. Venue, rings, deposits. With a few clicks, I transferred the remainder into my personal savings. It wasn't spite. It was protection. Clara had already shown me what she thought of my worth. I wasn't going to give her another chance to strip me down. That night, I slept better than I had in months. When Monday came, I went to work as usual. My co-workers asked how the wedding plans were coming along. For the first time, I didn't force a smile. "There won't be a wedding," I said simply. They stared at me, waiting for an explanation. I didn't give one. I didn't need to. The gossip would spread on its own. By the end of that first week, Clara's world was beginning to shift. She tried calling me, leaving voicemails filled with anger, then desperation, then silence. I didn't pick up. I knew this was only the beginning. But I also knew something else. She had already written her own ending. She just hadn't realized it yet. When I canceled everything, I assumed Clara would retreat into pride and distance herself quietly. For a few days, it looked like that might be the case. She stayed at her mother's house, avoided mutual friends, and sent me only a handful of messages, each one shorter than the last. But silence was not in Clara's nature. She thrived on control, and losing it was unbearable for her. The first move came on Thursday evening. My phone buzzed with a notification from a group chat we shared with her college friends. Clara had written a long post, half confession and half attack. She said I had sabotaged the wedding because I was insecure, that I had never believed I was good enough for her, and that I panicked at the idea of being responsible for a family. Reading her words, I almost laughed. There was no mention of what she had said about me. No mention of sperm banks or of bad genes. She painted herself as the abandoned victim of a man who couldn't handle commitment. I didn't respond. Not yet. Let her spin the story, I thought. People who shout first usually reveal the most. By Friday, her mother had joined the performance. A voicemail came through, her voice sharp with anger. She accused me of humiliating her daughter, of leaving her stranded in shame, of being selfish. She said the community would see me for who I truly was. I deleted it before it finished. That weekend, I was invited to a family dinner at my aunt's. I hadn't planned on going, but something in me wanted to see how far Clara would take her act. Sure enough, when I arrived, she was already there with her mother and stepfather. They had clearly positioned themselves for a confrontation. Dinner was stiff. The usual chatter was replaced by pointed questions. Someone asked me how the wedding plans were progressing, pretending not to know the answer. Clara's mother leaned forward, explaining to the table that the wedding had been canceled because I had emotional issues and couldn't handle responsibility. Clara herself nodded along, face painted with practiced sadness. I stayed quiet through most of it, letting them build their case. Then, when the conversation reached its peak of pity for Clara, I pulled out my phone. Weeks earlier, Clara had sent messages to one of her friends where she repeated almost word for word the cruel line she had delivered to me about not wanting children with someone short with bad genes. A friend of mine had forwarded screenshots when he heard what was happening. I had kept them, unsure if I'd ever use them. That night, I slid my phone across the table and let the group read for themselves. The room changed. The sympathy evaporated. Conversation stalled. Clara went pale, then red, then pale again. Her mother sputtered something about taken out of context, but the damage was done. I didn't need to explain. The words were hers. I stood up, thanked my aunt for dinner, and left without another word. Behind me, the silence was heavy. From that moment on, Clara lost her grip on the narrative. People who had rushed to defend her began to step back. Mutual friends stopped returning her calls. At work, colleagues who had once envied her engagement began whispering about her cruelty. She tried to fight back with small jabs, posts about being free from toxic relationships, photos staged with friends to suggest she was happier than ever. But it was transparent, and each attempt only fueled the gossip. Meanwhile, I kept my silence. I didn't explain myself publicly, didn't retaliate with insults. I let her words hang in the air like smoke that everyone could smell. That calmness worked better than anything else. People drew their own conclusions. One night, around midnight, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find Clara standing there, eyes puffy, hair unkempt, still in the coat she had probably borrowed from her mother. She begged me to let her in, said we could fix things and work it out. I stood in the doorway, blocking her path. I wasn't cruel. I didn't shout or gloat. I just told her that what she had said couldn't be taken back, not because of pride, but because it had revealed who she truly was. After a pause, she turned away without arguing. Her car door slammed, and I didn't see her again for weeks. The following days, the consequences began to ripple further. The wedding vendors she had flaunted to friends now knew the truth. One florist, who was a cousin of an acquaintance, shared Clara's comments privately. Soon it reached the ears of nearly everyone in our circle. The humiliation she had tried to avoid became impossible to contain. I focused on work. While Clara was spiraling, I was steady. My boss noticed. He complimented my focus and handed me new responsibilities. I poured myself into the tasks, partly to distract myself, partly to build something real while she destroyed herself with illusions. By the end of the month, Clara had become a shadow of her former self in social settings. Friends avoided inviting her to gatherings, worried about the tension she might bring. The image she had once cultivated, that of the polished, confident woman who had it all, was cracking under the weight of her own words. I didn't celebrate. There was no satisfaction in watching someone unravel, but I also didn't stop it. She had written the script herself. I had only chosen not to rescue her from it. Clara's stepfather eventually called me, though his tone was less combative than her mother's had been. He tried reasoning, suggesting that perhaps Clara had spoken in anger, that people said cruel things they didn't mean. He hinted at reconciliation, painting it as a way to restore balance for both families. I listened, thanked him for his words, and ended the call. What he didn't understand was that reconciliation wasn't about a single sentence. It was about the years leading to it, about the way Clara had been trained by her mother to view me as a compromise rather than a partner. That one sentence had just pulled the curtain away. The last attempt to regain control came when Clara tried to spin the story in her workplace. She hinted to colleagues that I had financial issues and couldn't provide stability. But the truth had already outrun her lies. Someone who knew someone in my company confirmed that I had just been promoted, and the rumor crumbled almost instantly. By the end of that season, Clara's life had shifted drastically. She was living full-time with her mother again. Her friends had thinned to only a few enablers, and she was forced to face whispers in nearly every social space she entered. I remained where I had always been, calm, steady, working, and building. It wasn't revenge in the loud, cinematic sense. It was something colder, quieter, but far more permanent. Her words had written her downfall, and my silence had carved it into stone. By the time winter came, Clara was still trying to claw her way back. She sent me another message, longer this time, filled with apologies wrapped in self-pity. She said she hadn't meant what she said, that it was a moment of weakness, that she had been influenced by her mother's harshness. I read it once, then deleted it. Because even if she was telling the truth, even if it was a moment of weakness, it revealed a truth I could never unhear. She didn't respect me. She never had. And without respect, everything else, the wedding, the vows, the plans for a life together, was just an empty performance. That was when I realized the real revenge wasn't in destroying her reputation or humiliating her in public. The real revenge was in refusing to play her game at all. She had expected me to fight, to beg, to rage. Instead, I dismantled the future she thought she controlled and walked away in silence. And as the silence grew louder around her, it became the only sound she could hear. When Clara realized her story had collapsed in public, she didn't retreat gracefully. She had never known how to accept defeat quietly. Instead, she turned to a weapon she thought would work in her favor: character assassination. The first sign came when an old friend from high school called me one evening, sounding hesitant. He asked if it was true that I had been controlling, that I had kept Clara from seeing friends, and that I had lost my temper when things didn't go my way. At first, I thought he was joking. But as he went on, I realized Clara had been whispering poison into ears that were already curious. She had framed me as the insecure man who couldn't handle her success. According to her, I had sabotaged the wedding because I feared she would outgrow me. She even hinted at abuse, not with specific stories, but with carefully chosen phrases that left space for imagination. I didn't panic. Instead, I let the lies travel far enough to expose themselves. Whenever someone repeated her words, I met them with calm explanations. No hostility, no defensiveness, just facts. I reminded them that Clara had been the one living with her mother, that she had been the one sending late-night messages begging for reconciliation, and that there had never been any complaint of control in the 3 years we were together. The people who mattered believed me because they had seen me. They had watched me work long hours, save money, and agree to Clara's endless demands. They had witnessed her coldness, the way she looked down on others. Her accusations didn't hold. If anything, they backfired. Each time someone tested her story against my behavior, the cracks widened. Still, she didn't stop. By spring, Clara had started parading a new relationship on social media. His name was Dorian, a personal trainer at her gym. He was tall, muscular, photogenic, the exact opposite of everything she had accused me of being. Within weeks, her profiles filled with staged photos, dinners at trendy restaurants, trips to wine bars, workouts filmed from flattering angles. The captions were dripping with innuendo about finding someone strong enough to handle her. People saw through it. They whispered that she was overcompensating, trying too hard to prove something. But Clara didn't care. She was convinced this new romance would rewrite her image. erased the humiliation she had suffered. For me, it was almost amusing to watch from a distance. Every post she made only emphasized the contrast between her world and mine. While she was chasing attention, I was settling into a rhythm of quiet progress. At work, my promotion had turned into something more significant. My boss trusted me with a project that required coordination across multiple departments. It was stressful, but it showcased my reliability. A few months later, I received another bump in pay and a new title. My parents, who had been quietly worried about how Clara treated me, celebrated the news with genuine pride. Meanwhile, Clara's new romance began to unravel faster than anyone expected. At first, it was little things, whispers from people who spotted her arguing with Dorian in public, reports of late-night fights outside bars. Then came the bigger crack. Someone from the gym confided that Dorian had been bragging about how Clara was high maintenance and how he was just along for the perks. Within 3 months, their photo parade ended abruptly. Clara deleted every trace of him from her profiles, a silent admission that the relationship had collapsed. If she thought the rebound would fix her reputation, it had done the opposite. People mocked the speed of the breakup. Some even suggested she had been used. The same friends she once leaned on now rolled their eyes whenever her name came up. And then, the financial troubles began. During our engagement, Clara had secretly taken out a small loan to cover some of the upfront costs she had promised would be her contribution. I hadn't known the details, but I learned later that she had borrowed against her credit line, expecting that once we were married, I would help absorb the payments. With the wedding canceled, the creditors started calling. At first, she tried to mask it with bravado. She hinted that she was investing in new ventures, that she was rebuilding her independence. But it wasn't long before the truth leaked out. Mutual acquaintances mentioned that Clara was borrowing from friends, that she had been late on rent payments before retreating fully back to her mother's house. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The woman who had dismissed me as bad genes and unworthy of fatherhood was now drowning in debt, clinging to the only safety net she had left, a mother who enabled every poor decision she made. For me, life moved in the opposite direction. I didn't flaunt my progress, but word spread anyway. My new position at work came with better hours, more respect, and enough financial stability to consider buying a place of my own. Colleagues invited me to gatherings more often. Friends who had once worried I was trapped in a toxic relationship now celebrated my freedom. Clara must have heard about it, because the messages started again. This time they weren't angry or manipulative. They were apologetic, filled with regret. She claimed she had been under pressure, that she hadn't meant the words about children, that she had been influenced by her mother's cruelty. I didn't respond. I didn't block her either. Letting her words fall into the void was more powerful than any reply I could give. By summer, the situation had reached a kind of climax. Clara's debts had grown, her reputation had sunk, and her attempts at rebuilding through new relationships had failed. She was stuck in the same house where she had retreated after I canceled the wedding, only now with fewer allies and fewer options. I ran into her once in town, outside a coffee shop. She looked tired, older somehow, her clothes slightly worn. She froze when she saw me, expecting, I don't know what. A confrontation? A cruel remark? Instead, I simply nodded politely and kept walking. That small gesture, that refusal to acknowledge the drama, seemed to wound her more deeply than any insult. Later, I heard from a mutual friend that Clara had tried applying for jobs outside the city, desperate for a fresh start. But every time she tried, her mother pulled her back, insisting she deserved better and shouldn't settle. It was the same poison that had shaped Clara into the woman who once looked me in the eye and dismissed me as unworthy. The cycle was complete. She had inherited her mother's contempt and now was trapped by it. I thought about revenge often, but not in the way most people imagine. I didn't want to see her destroyed in some dramatic collapse. The real revenge was already happening. She was reaping the consequences of her arrogance, her cruelty, and her blind faith that life would always bend to her will. Every day she stayed on that couch in her mother's house. Every call from a creditor, every failed attempt at salvaging her reputation. It was all the revenge I needed. By the end of that year, the contrast between us was impossible to ignore. I had moved into a small but comfortable apartment closer to work. My savings were growing. I was even seeing someone new, though I kept it quiet, cautious after everything I had been through. Clara, on the other hand, had become a cautionary tale. Her name was spoken with pity in some circles, with ridicule in others. She had gone from the woman who once demanded luxury weddings and Mediterranean honeymoons to someone who couldn't pay her own bills. It wasn't a loud downfall, but it was complete. And the best part? I didn't have to lift a finger. By the time the year turned, Clara had burned through nearly every option she had. Her mother remained her fiercest defender, But even that loyalty was beginning to fray under the weight of overdue bills and endless excuses. Friends had distanced themselves. The rebound romance with Dorian was nothing but an embarrassing memory. Her attempts to smear me had failed so completely that people now treated her words as comedy rather than slander. I might have expected her to fade into obscurity, to rebuild quietly in some other place. But Clara was not built for quiet. She needed spectacle, an audience, validation, even if it destroyed her. And so came the final act. It started on an ordinary Tuesday morning. I was at work, reviewing documents for a meeting, when I received a message from the receptionist downstairs. She said a woman was insisting she needed to speak with me urgently. When I asked who, she hesitated before admitting it was Clara. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Months of silence, dozens of unanswered messages, and now she was standing in the lobby of my workplace. Against my better judgment, I went downstairs. Clara was there with her mother. Both of them were dressed as if they had prepared for a performance. Clara wore a tailored coat, hairstyled, makeup layered heavily enough to disguise her exhaustion. Her mother stood beside her like a general ready to launch a final offensive. Before I could speak, Clara's mother began. She accused me of abandoning Clara, of humiliating her in public, of ruining her future. She raised her voice loud enough that people in the lobby turned to stare. Clara stood silently, tears welling in her eyes, as if rehearsed to appear fragile. I let her finish. Then, in the same calm tone I had used since the very first night, I told the truth. I explained that Clara herself had said she didn't want children with me because I was too short, with bad genes, and that she preferred the idea of a sperm bank. I didn't embellish. I didn't exaggerate. I simply repeated her words. The lobby fell silent. Even the receptionist stopped typing. Clara's mother froze, as if the air had been punched out of her. And Clara, realizing the eyes of strangers were on her, broke. She shouted that I was twisting her words, that I was making her look like a monster. She accused me of conspiring to destroy her reputation, of planting lies among our friends. Her voice cracked as she raged, the tears that had been staged now spilling in anger rather than sorrow. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Everyone watching could see the truth without me saying another word. Clara's outburst escalated until security arrived and escorted both women out of the building. As they left, Clara screamed that I had ruined her life and that I would regret it. But the only thing I felt was an overwhelming sense of closure. She had exposed herself more thoroughly than I ever could have. That night, I received a flood of messages from colleagues, friends, even acquaintances who had heard about the scene. Most expressed support. Some admitted they had doubted me before, but now understood. Clara's breakdown had erased any lingering sympathy people might have had for her. Her final attempt to control the narrative had destroyed it permanently. In the months that followed, Clara disappeared from most social spaces. Her social media accounts went dark. Friends who had once been her confidants told me they hadn't heard from her in weeks. She was still living with her mother, still drowning in debt, still stuck in the same cycle that had consumed her. Meanwhile, my life continued to grow. I focused on my work, and it paid off again. Another project, another step up the ladder, another layer of stability. I wasn't rich, but I was respected. More importantly, I was free. I began seeing someone new. Not a whirlwind romance, not some stage replacement, but a steady, genuine connection with a woman named Leah. She was kind, grounded, uninterested in spectacle. She valued conversation, patience, and honesty. With her, I felt none of the pressure I had endured with Clara. It was simple, and it was real. I didn't flaunt the relationship. I didn't post photos or parade it around. But word eventually reached Clara anyway. A mutual acquaintance told me she had seen Clara's reaction when she found out. She had gone pale, then shaken her head in disbelief, as if the idea of me moving on peacefully was more unbearable than any humiliation she had suffered. The last time I saw Clara in person was almost a year after the canceled wedding. I was walking through town with Leah when we passed a cafe. Clara was inside, sitting alone by the window. Her hair was unkempt, her clothes plain, her expression hollow. For a moment, our eyes met. There was no anger in her look anymore, no attempt at defiance. Just weariness. She looked away almost instantly, staring down into her coffee. I didn't stop. I didn't acknowledge her. Leah asked if I knew the woman, and I simply said yes, once a long time ago. That was the truth. Clara had once been the center of my world, but now she was only a shadow in the background of a life I no longer shared with her. Looking back, people sometimes ask me if I regret how I handled it, if I wish I had confronted her more aggressively, demanded apologies, or sought revenge in louder, more dramatic ways. I tell them no. The real revenge was never about shouting or fighting. It was about refusing to let her dictate the terms of my life. It was about exposing her words through silence, about letting her own actions carve her downfall. Clara had once thought she could define me as short with bad genes. She had thought she could strip me of dignity with a sentence. But what she didn't realize was that dignity isn't something someone else gives you. It's something you keep for yourself, no matter what. And that was the part she could never touch. Today, Clara still lives with her mother. She works odd jobs, drifts between temporary positions, and occasionally tries to reinvent herself, though each attempt seems to collapse under the weight of her past. People no longer whisper about her cruelty. They've moved on. But those who remember shake their heads when her name comes up, a quiet reminder of what arrogance can cost. As for me, I moved forward. The canceled wedding became a turning point rather than a tragedy. It gave me clarity, strength, and the chance to build something real without compromise. In the end, Clara did get what she wanted. No children with me, no life built together, no future shared. She got exactly what she said aloud that night on the couch. But the irony, the punishment, the karma, was that it wasn't her choice anymore. It was mine. And that's the story. If you're still here, that means you're one of us. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button. I drop new chaos every single day. And trust me, tomorrow's story, it's even worse than this one.